Because if a woman says she don't like prostitute, that's a fucking liar. Women have clitorises, and no matter how much fucking they do, they can never be fully satisfied. That's why some countries cut their shit off. You know, they do female circumcision because they don't want the bitches to be whoring out on their husbands. And I support that shit. I really do support that idea.
Avoid relationships. Why would you step into a voluntary war and fraternize with the enemy? And yes, women are your enemy. I'm sick of pretending that women aren't the enemies of men just because most of them have been deceived into accepting feminism. I'm not buying that.
Many MRAs don't fully understand what the concept of gender war is all about and what it fully entails. And in this video I said that if I were to see a woman being raped, I would continue on as if nothing ever happened. And I still stand by that statement unapologetically, and I assert that I'm 100% justified in this line of thought.
Let me approach this first by dispelling the myth that gays are being oppressed. Gays have more rights than others just for being gay. And the reasons that gays are being deprived the right to marry is because they cannot, by definition, grow a marriage into a family without adopting, and in doing so, completely skewing the prospective child's understanding of the concept of gender and reproduction. The only things I need to understand that homosexuality is a dysfunction is my common sense and my biblical morality. I heard this shit, I wanted to get up and spit in her face as an introduction to what I think about people like her. And I'm not going to repeat or try to convey what else I wanted to do to her, because I would simply seem then like a pretty disturbed individual to you femme-ra bitches. That's right, femme-ra bitches, who are more worried about the feminists and how they might not like my intimidating or abrasive language.
The clips that you just saw were the clips of two MRAs known as Barbarossa and Rex 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They're pretty typical of the kind of thing that you'll see on our MRA's channel. The variation isn't very high, let's put it that way. Now, one of the reasons that I decided to do this particular video in the way that I've done it is because over the last several weeks I've been watching the thing happen with Free Thought blogs, and once again the battle appears to be between feminists and MRAs. Now, we already know that not all feminists are created equal, nor are they created equally crazy. Radical feminists tend to be the biggest problem that we as a culture encounter when it comes to feminism. Beyond that, there are many other flavors, but all of them have their problems, and all of them have their problem children, let's put it that way. But to speak to an MRA, you will hear an idea that seems almost foreign when you really think about it. The idea that all feminism is evil and that women are in fact not an oppressed minority in any such way, shape, or form, but rather that they are the oppressors. It's the reverse victimhood card that the MRA plays in an attempt to drum up some sort of phony support for their actions and for what they do, but this is exactly their actions and what they do. Even if you try to get them to admit that they have people in their midst who say things like this, and obviously they do, you'll get the no true Scotsman fallacy over and over again. They'll make something up to where they say, well, men don't really do this, or the MRAs don't really do this. Can you prove that the MRA made the death threat? This kind of thing, this kind of bullshit, and we already know what the reality is, so we can set that aside. But over the last few weeks, I've also noticed a distinct problem that people seem to be siding with these miscreants simply because of a fear of radical feminism. Here's the funny part about this entire thing. The whole faux fear of radical feminism is bullshit. The reason being that they don't really have all that much power in the first place. In fact, they have very little power in academia or any place else. In fact, the only place you're going to find most radical feminists is some college where they've already gotten tenure and can't be fired, or like Gail Dines at a liberal arts college where the same standards of so to speak, production aren't held. In other words, you don't have to produce scientific articles or research to do anything worthwhile. You can just tour around selling your book, complaining about porn. Beyond that, there isn't a whole lot of power. Even in places where they were said to have power, like Sweden, they've been largely diminished down to pretty much ineffectual group at this point. So what's all the brouhaha about radical feminism? Why are they so fearful of this? Well, it comes down to a very carefully laid plan of mice and men. In this case of MRA mice and men. They've convinced a lot of people that there's this imminent threat of radical feminism that is slowly taking over human life, so to speak, and that the threat is so acute and so justifiably malignant that they must engage in all manner of miscreancy themselves in order to counter it. But when you strip away the bullshit, the false stats, the ridiculous notions, the conspiracy theories, and everything else that you find in and around this movement, it's simply and totally, in the end, about hatred of women for whatever reason. Now, I'll go over some of this here in a moment. But first, let's have ourselves a good old-fashioned Will McAvoy gut check moment. And this is to any MRA who has the balls to show up, not as a sock account, but through their main account, and actually do something worthwhile. All of you are convinced that you're being undermined, that men's rights are being undermined, things of this nature. Well, I ask you this same question that Will McAvoy asked of Rick Santorum, not directly, but of the candidate that was meant to represent him in the forum they were running. Name for me one single right that you have lost, that you had when you were born, that has been taken from you as a result of feminism or radical feminism. Show me one single right that you have lost as a result of radical feminism. Point to me one place. This is the same thing that Lincoln asked Douglas in the Douglas-Lincoln debates when they were trying to encourage a war with Mexico. And Lincoln dared Douglas to show him one bare patch of ground where one drop of American blood had been spilt. It's the same thing that I'm asking now. The reason being because, as I said, when you strip away this bullshit, you strip this thing down to its inherent parts. It's nothing more than a smokescreen for misogyny. That's what it's about. That's what it's always been about. That's what it's going to continue to be about. And just because the enemy of your enemy looks like your friend does not mean you enter into a shameful alliance with these people. I would rather walk alone than to walk with them. They are simply, and quite obviously, people who do not work for anyone's interest but themselves and on their own petty jealousies. I really am kind of taken aback at the people that side with these individuals. Some of them out of naivete, some of them out of malice for whatever reason, but all of them are motivated by something. Now, lots of us don't ever compromise our, let's put it this way, our values and our ethics in order to advance a goal against someone we may disagree with. We tend to do it in different ways. But most of us do not make shameful alliances with this kind of individual or this kind of group, which should never be trusted because they will instantaneously, whenever convenient, throw the people that they're using right now under the bus as soon as they become a liability to them. And there will be nothing that I can do to dissuade people from this, so I will not attempt to. It is simply for them to discover the true nature of the malignancy that they are now engaged in. An alliance formed in hate is never to be trusted. It doesn't matter if it wears the righteous label of MRA nor the righteous label of radical feminism, because both in the end are nothing more than fanatics hell-bent on dominating other people and their lives. There's transphobia in both groups. There is homosexual phobia, as you heard in that particular rant by Barbarossa, in both groups. There is hatred of the opposite sex, depending on your aspect, in both groups. But I am addressing the MRAs at this point. I will address radical feminism at a different junction because it involves something that I have been looking into over the last several weeks, months, and or, the amount of time that I haven't really been active has always been spent doing something, not necessarily in idle time. But I'm addressing them at this moment. Their gripes or claims of economic disbursement in terms of alimony and of child support. What they don't mention, and excuse me, in most cases, that when it comes to alimony and child support, if you are suffering an undue burden and cannot pay the full amount, you can have it reduced by the court. It's just a matter of filing the correct paperwork. The court wants the individual to be able to support their family, but they also don't want to break them, because no one is served by such a thing. Also, when it comes to divorce, remember we're talking about the dissolution of a civil union that was entered into by two people. It doesn't matter if they're male, female, 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 male, male. It doesn't matter. Transgender person with transgender person with someone else. It doesn't matter. The point is the dissolution of a partnership that is agreed upon in a civil manner. That has come to an end in the form of divorce, which means that there's probably bad blood and bad feelings. And unfortunately, I've noticed that, especially in our culture, people tend to get really petty really quick. And it doesn't take long for a divorce to devolve into both people trying to hurt the other person as much as humanly possible, any way they can, especially financially in some cases. This is a matter of people acting like children. Not of any one sex being favored over the other. This is both people not acting like adults, and I've seen this happen personally myself, unfortunately, on a number of occasions. It truly is remarkable to me when there are people who get divorced and actually have no problems doing so. Usually they are the people that act like adults, and that's very rare. So nobody's on this end, especially with my end, is buying this idea that somehow the family courts are biased, and somehow that because women get different sentencing in murder cases sometimes, and as I said, we haven't seen the actual facts of those cases, so it's impossible to say whether or not the sentence was appropriate unless we were to have the minutes from the court. You just can't sit there and say, well, women don't necessarily get the death penalty as often as men, as if that is something that you should be latching on to because it does nothing to support any of your arguments, but you've got nothing else. And this was the only thing that you and your buddies could figure out on the internet that actually supported what you said. And even then it doesn't really support it, nor did any of your sources, which is unfortunate because sources are meant to actually support what you're talking about. But that doesn't happen here, and I will discuss sources at length in another video, because as someone pointed out on another video, actually it was Cardinal Virtues that pointed out about Elmo's sources had nothing to do with what he was talking about, and I actually said to him I plan on doing another video about just the sources in general. So that's is a crock of shit. Faux fear of radical feminism, false claims about family courts. What about false rape allegations? Well, sometimes there are false rape allegations. Sometimes it's somebody makes an honest mistake, as that woman did in Florida. I'll see if I can find the actual link to the story. She actually identified her rapist in a lineup, at least that's what she thought. She was convinced of it. She saw the guy's face. She was convinced of it. Absolutely convinced that she had the right person. Well, Innocence Project gets a hold of the DNA sample. Lo and behold, the gentleman that she had thought had raped her had not. He was innocent. And the DNA was actually linked to a man already serving time for another sexual assault. 13 years of his life, I believe, was gone as a result of what happened. She was convinced. Now, in an interesting twist, these two have become very close friends, believe it or not, which is an interesting idea in and of itself. And as he says, he doesn't really hold any malice towards her, but she still feels tremendous guilt in what happened. This is an example of mistaken identity gone awry. That is why it's important to do good investigation in science in such cases. Do these false allegations happen? Yes, they do. Does that mean that all women are guilty of such a thing? No. Does it mean that a rape allegation, no matter what it is, should not be taken seriously? No. You do have to take it seriously. Such is the incumbent necessity of living in a republic, of living in a system that is supposed to value law and order. It doesn't work perfectly because it's people operating in it. But that doesn't mean that the one sex is favored over another, nor does it mean that the one sex is automatically believed over another, because as much as I hear these nonsensical stories about people being thrown in jail for not hitting their girlfriend just because they called, it's always just so stories, or a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. They never identify anything concrete, and even if they do, we're talking about a one-off incident. It does not make a pattern. It's just a rhetorical device to get people to believe the never-ending stream of bullshit that comes out of this individual movement, if you could even call it that. So, nobody's really buying that either. Now, what about women's rights? That's usually what the feminist movement addresses, women's rights in terms of getting paid the same. The Ledbetter Equal Pay Act finally was instituted, so that may start to remedy some of the things in terms of disparities in pay. There is a disparity in pay. They offer all kinds of platitudes to why that is. I don't find them compelling because, as I've discovered in some of my own looking about, the truth is that in many cases the disparity in pay comes down to simple good old-fashioned sexism. It's unfortunate, but it's true. Just as racism, sexism is alive and well. In fact, the fact that I had those two clips proves that it's alive and well, and very alive and well in the MRA movement, so nobody's buying that shit either. Now, what about women's rights in other arenas? Well, let me ask this. When's the last time that a male in this society ever had any one tell him he couldn't engage in some sort of reproductive activity, or that he couldn't buy condoms because it was against God? Because women get told this on a regular basis. Their reproductive rights, even as we speak, are under assault. The idea that women do not have autonomy over their own body. Well, what about the male in the situation? Well, the woman has taken all the risks, as I've said before, so to me, it is her decision. Because pregnancy is a damn dangerous thing at times. And it's a doubtful thing. And the guy being around to actually support the woman is also doubtful, unless she tells him to get lost, and that's all there is to it. So, I'm sorry. No, you don't really get a say in it. And I'm not interested in fairness. I'm not interested in what you perceive to be fair. I'm simply looking out for the interests of the person who is most interested in such a thing, and that is the woman who has to carry the child to term. If that seems unfair, callous, or somehow denying of your rights, so be it. I'm fine with that, actually. I have no problem admitting that I'm not really concerned with fairness when it comes to this kind of thing, for the simple reason that the woman deals with the consequences far more than the man usually does, especially if something goes wrong. Risk management, as far as I'm concerned. Not to mention that the child in and of itself may not have a very good chance in life because the mother can't take care of it. So if she chooses to abort it, it should be her business and no one else's. And that's the way it should be. To avoid unwanted children becoming the criminals of tomorrow, or becoming the sociopaths of tomorrow, regardless of what gender they are. So, there's nothing like that facing men at this point. We are not facing any assault on our reproductive rights. We're not really facing any assault on any of our rights at this point. Not collectively. And what about the useful pawns of their game? As was pointed out in the other video, about the fact that they try to speak for people who do dangerous jobs, like Beach did, who I believe he was wounded in the line of duty, like my father was in Vietnam. My father was also brick mason for 30 years, went inside very dangerous work in furnaces to repair them, to build them, that kind of thing. But yet my father didn't complain, and he made sure he took care of all the people around him, regardless of who they were. My father also wouldn't enter into the house of anyone he knew, his male friends, if their wife was home and they were home alone. He would not enter the house. He did not consider it proper. That was the way my father felt. That was the way my father thought. He thought this because, unlike people like these MRAs, he had something called principles, ethics, dignity, honor. These are words lost on you little shysters. They're lost on you because you're a bunch of selfish little brats, yelling and screaming about how put upon you are when there are so many others who have it much worse than you do. Not just in terms of lower classes in this country, but of people everywhere else in the planet who are literally starving at times. So I don't want to hear you complain about this, because it comes off as nothing more than a cheap hustle to me. And I do not find it compelling when you claim to be speaking for people like my father, or people like Beach, who also served his country and was wounded in the line of his service to this country, and who takes part in government on an active basis, actually does the things that you guys complain about all the time. It's an insult to him, to my father, and to every other person who does a dangerous job, because that's what they do. And the whining is not very becoming, I have to say. So let's get that straight. So your rights are not really being assaulted. Radical feminism is a red herring meant to scare people into trying to support you for no other reason than you want an excuse to justify your malice. And the fact that every now and then when you get pissed off, you just prefer to jack your girlfriend or your wife in the jaw and not get in trouble for it. That's the kind of shit that an animal does. Let's put it that way. That kind of reactionary bullshit, that's what animals do, not humans. Which brings me to my next point. As much as the hyper use of and misuse of social constructionism is the domain of the radical feminists, evolutionary psychology and bastardizing of biological imperatives and norms is the domain of the MRA. Beta males, no such thing as a beta male. It's a completely moot term. It does not mean anything. It doesn't show up in any kind of scientific literature, especially in primates where we deal with dominant animals. What's the role of the dominant animal? What's the so-called alpha male do? Well, if you listen in this culture, it's some posturing, preening peacock asshole who is very boisterous, bravadous, and does a lot to look after his body. Actually, it's not what the alpha does. It's not what the dominant animal in any group, be it male or female, does. The dominant animal in these groups tends to be the most stable. They do tend to be strong, but they tend to be intelligent. They keep the peace. They make sure that they look out for their group. They know the best feeding spots. They know the best places to nest at night in terms of primates. This is largely what the alpha or the dominant individual does, though the changes between species to species, culture to culture. Humans don't have this kind of hierarchy. Not really. We do tend to accept leadership of certain people, but we only do so after those people have proven themselves, generally. Not always, but generally. More importantly, the qualities of being a leader in general are rare in and of themselves in both genders. It takes a lot to cultivate the ability to lead, to use leadership, to use rhetoric to influence people, and to maintain a sense of propriety in what you do in order that you do not become a tyrant. It is a very careful balancing act, one I am all too aware of. And I have to be very careful myself not to misuse my ability to speak to people, to convince them to do things. I don't want that. I want them to weigh themselves and measure themselves and ask themselves the important questions. How do you know what you know? How do you know what you think you know? I don't want people to follow blindly what I say. Nothing could be more terrifying and more reprehensible to me. But I'm very aware that I could do that if I really wish. And I fight constantly to resist that urge, because no one's served by it. The truth is, the alpha male in this culture is not the same as the alpha male of other species. And most importantly, and this video is running a little long, but I had a lot to say in it, we who can speak for ourselves don't need you to speak for us. We're perfectly capable of doing it. And there are many of us who don't buy into your crap. We don't buy into the crap idea that if a woman dresses provocatively, she's somehow asking for it. We do not buy into the idea that somehow, some way, there's a misandric conspiracy that reaches to the highest levels of all things and yet doesn't do anything to win any real power for itself, nor has it done so over thousands of years. Nobody buys that either. I don't buy that you have lost any real right in your entire life, and I certainly don't buy this concept that you keep coming up with, all of you keep coming up with, that you as the male sex are the most oppressed and put upon people on the planet, especially all of you living your comfortable lives without any real cares in the world for the most part. There's nothing worse than upper middle class people with so little to do that they have to fuck with the lives of other people, especially people that are worse off than they are. So please take your bullshit and peddle it someplace else, because nobody on this channel is buying, and nobody's buying on a lot of other channels either. As for the people who have become convinced that these people are somehow worthy just because they're fighting some radical feminist conspiracy that has no form, has proven to be ineffectual in doing anything, and can't be traced to anything of substance, you guys really need to look at what you're doing. Take a good, hard, long look at the people you're supporting, and ask yourself, is it really worth it to do so? Is it really worth putting yourself in this position for the sake of people who aren't really worth the time and the effort? As I said, the enemy of your enemy is not your friend, especially if ultimately they're still your enemy. Don't forget that they hate women. That should never be lost sight of, and the alliance forged in hate is a fragile thing at best. So when the betrayal comes, you really shouldn't be too surprised. I realize that I've gone a long while on this one, but there was a great deal to say, and I am now finished saying it. Thank you, and good night.